Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this webinar organised by the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. Thank you to everyone who's sparing the time to be part of this conversation today. My name is Stephen Twigg, and I'm the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. 2023 is, of course, the halfway year between the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals back in 2015 and the target date of 2030, Agenda 2030. And we are meeting just weeks ahead of the United Nations General Assembly, at which, of course, there will be the Sustainable Development Goals Summit. And at that summit, the CPA will be launching a new course as part of our online Parliamentary Academy that will address the role of parliaments in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The Academy was launched 2 years ago. It provides an opportunity for our members and others to undertake courses in their own time. And I encourage all of those who are participating today to look at our website, look at the Academy, and benefit from those courses. I'm joined here in London by my colleague, Marshall Tisdale, and he will be providing a link in the chat shortly to a pre-webinar survey. Can I encourage everyone, if you can, to do that survey? It's very short, and it just assists us with our monitoring and evaluation of this and other pieces of programme activity. And at the end, there will be a further short post-seminar survey, which again, I'd encourage people to participate in. We have 5 fantastic panelists, and I'm really delighted that they're able to join us today. And I know we're going to have a very rich and diverse conversation over the next hour or so. I've asked them each to speak for up to 10 minutes, which should mean we have a short period at the end for question and answer. So for those who are attending, please do put any questions that you might have into the chat, and I'll do my best to address them in that short period at the end, but we will certainly finish in an hour and 10 minutes from now. Also in the chat will be information about the various social media handles that the CPA uses. So let's get on with the business of the day, and I'm going to invite our first speaker. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are clearly a running priority throughout the UN, and a key partner for us in the CPA is UNDP, the UN Development Programme. So I'm very pleased indeed that we have joining us Ricardo Godinho Gomez, Chief Technical Advisor at UNDP, and he's going to provide an introduction from the perspective of the UNDP. Please, over to you, Ricardo. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, I will just share my screen, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me as UNDP to speak about the role of parliaments in the implementation of the SDGs. My apologies for my bad English. I'm Lusophone. I would also like to greet my colleagues, speakers, and all those that are following us through Zoom. My presentation will focus on a brief point on where we are with the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. Then I will speak a bit about the role of parliaments in the implementation of the SDGs and scoping into the work of UNDP with parliaments to advance the SDGs. I will close the presentation with a few lessons looking beyond the Agenda 2030. So, the Agenda 2030 and its SDGs are a global shared commitment. It remains our overarching roadmap for achieving the sustainable development and overcoming multiple crises that we all know that have been affecting our world. The agenda is a promise. It's not a guarantee. Now that we are halfway to the deadline, as you said, it is clear that that promise is in peril, and all the results that were tending to be favorable after the 2015 commitments are now stagnant, seem to be stagnant, some seem to be regressing. And it's very, very important that we understand that we are in a moment where the agenda is really in peril. So, just a second, to talk a bit about the SDGs by themselves and where we are. Out of the 140 targets that has some data collected, 12% are on track. More than half are out of track, moderately or severely, and some 30% have either seen no movement or even regressed from 2015 baselines. As we go to the next SDG Summit, in everybody's mind, the word is caution. Caution because we have not been able to collect enough data, and the data, the insufficient data that is collected, is showing trends of some stagnation or even regression in some of the targets. Also, the governments of the world might enter the summit with reduced space for commitments due to the current geopolitics. The parliaments and SDGs. Parliaments are an important actor in the implementation of the SDGs. They are key for drafting the legislation needed to incorporate the SDGs into national legal frameworks. They are key also in overseeing the implementation of the government. They are key in overseeing the government implementation of SDGs through the budget. They ensure oversight, and they also secure that the representation of people, some rights, minorities, are reflected in the legislation approved. They play a role in localizing the SDGs. So parliaments have a role, and that role is key to accelerate the transformations that are needed to implement the targets of SDGs. Now, how complex can it be for parliaments and MPs to contribute for the Agenda 2030 and the operationalization of the SDG targets with all the discussions that we are having about the clusters or transformations that are key to push the SDG targets and the Agenda 2030. If you look at this table, you will see the complexity of interconnections that exist between the transformational areas and the SDGs themselves, so we can have a pace that allow us to reach the commitments that were made in 2015 in 2030. UNDP has been working with parliaments in several areas to push for their participation in this global effort to accelerate the implementation of UNDP. UNDP works to strengthen parliamentary bodies by boosting efforts to reform and improve parliaments and local assemblies. making them more representative, open, and accountable. Parliamentary openness. UNDP has been working with parliaments around the world in delivering training and building skills among parliamentarians and their secretaries.
Ricardo, I'm very, very sorry to interrupt. I think the slides aren't, I think you need to be on presentation mode.
They are not passing.
They're not passing, so it's just got your original slide. No, that's great, you've done it. Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
Okay, so let me see if I don't want to lose any more time for you. I was saying that we work with parliaments in delivering training and building skills among parliamentarians and their secretariats on legislative and budget scrutiny, gender equality, international human rights, obligations, and critical sustainable development issues that parliaments need to act on. We work on enhancing parliamentary transparency using new technologies, tools, and capacities in data, budgeting, and finance, and we broke partnerships between parliaments and other relevant state and non-state actors, governance actors. So UNDP is working with parliaments around the globe to promote these access, working in this access to promote their participation in the global effort to speed up the pace of transformation that is needed to achieve the SDG commitments by 2030. We have a lot of examples, but we will focus in one in this discussion, and in the discussions we can bring others. It's the UNDP EU-funded multi-country program for consolidating economic governance and PFMS in the 6 African-speaking, Portuguese-speaking countries and Timor-Leste, known as PALOTL countries. And in this program, UNDP and its partners have been, including parliaments, have been building partnerships among state and non-state PFM actors since 2014. We have now extended until 2026. The partnerships are operationalized through multi-stakeholder communities of practice and multi-country parliamentary high-level working groups involving MPs, parliamentary staff, Supreme Audit Institution auditors, and technical staff, government officials, especially from ministries of finance and planning. The focus of the work that we are carrying with them is on the SDGs 5, 16, and 17. So, to talk a bit about this program that the acronym is the PROPALOTL, we know that traditionally delivering democratic governance, including parliamentary accountability, is critical, and this program is creating a space where through South-South triangle of cooperation, partnerships and peer learning among institutions inside each of the 6 countries, the core economic governance institutions and PFMS, but also with multi-country in the 6, including Portugal and Brazil that participate. We are exposing parliamentarians to the challenges of oversight over the budget along the fiscal year, looking into complex areas. So in 2020 in Luanda, we gathered parliamentarians, technical staff from parliament, ministries of finance, Supreme Audit institutions in Angola, around 140. And just after the 2019 SDG Summit, they discussed the contributions of all these state actors, PFM state actors, to the SDG agenda. And they commit to important targets, each one of the branches of the state here. In 2022, parliamentary budget committees were focusing in discussing how to control oversight exerts oversight over huge sources of revenue, complex sources of revenue as sovereign wealth funds. It happened in Mozambique, and it gathered all the 6 countries' budget committees and parliamentary staff. Since 2014, these parliaments have been working in this all-of-government approach to promote gender equality, using gender-responsive budgeting and oversight of gender expenditure, of public expenditures focusing on gender, as the main tools to promote more equal economies and gender equality through their capacity of changing laws, creating space for discussion, and promoting political agendas. And in 2023, UNDP used this experience as a policy brief within the scope of its gender equality strategy 2023-2026. Also, an example was the Forum of Public Finance of these 6 countries that were organized in partnership with One Academy and gathered ministries of finance, heads of budget committees and parliaments, and supreme audit institutions, heads and senior auditors, but also civil society, to discuss how to reform public finance in a way that it strengthen and make more inclusive the PFM institutions, the public institutions, and promote more open, transparent, and accountable public finance management. Parliamentarians are playing a key role in all these dynamics that are being promoted locally and transversally among these countries.
Ricardo,
just to close.
Thank you.
Public also is invited to participate using data technology into a digital platform that is simplifying budgets and is creating an index of transparency where parliamentarians, public, and ministers of finance are together in these 6 countries. To close with the lessons, here we have parliaments that have proper SDG coordination structures do better in exerting oversight over the SDGs. And looking beyond the 2023, parliaments will always be parliaments. They will continue to be the House of Representatives of the public. They will never be think tanks or research cabinets. Legislation and oversight will continue to be subjected to politics of representation, and parliaments will need to partner with other actors to ensure checks and balances in today's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, and navigate the complexity of operationalizing SDGs. And finally, parliaments, the many transformations needed to accelerate the operationalization of SDGs will require increased domestic resource mobilization capacities. Parliaments will have to be very, very aware of this and comprehend this, and easy access to open, timely, and accurate granular data on sustainable development and local, national, regional, global levels. Governments need to provide these services, and parliaments need to be able to use them. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for the time and for the inconvenience with the presentation.
Ricardo, thank you very much indeed, and there is absolutely no need for an apology. That was a tour de force in providing an introduction. You started with what I think understandably is a gloomy prognosis of the SDGs in peril, but you then took that to some great concrete examples of practical things that are being done to make a difference, and then emphasizing at the end the difference that is made by parliaments having a proper coordination structure. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm pleased now to move to our second panelist, Sir Mark Lowcock, Mark is a senior fellow at the Centre for Global Development, was previously, of course, head of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and before that, Permanent Secretary in the Department for International Development in the United Kingdom. Mark, over to you.
Well, Stephen, thank you very much indeed. Hello, everybody. Really lovely to be part of this event today. Let me just start with a point about the value of goal frameworks and, you know, the SDGs in particular. I spent a lot of my career focused on promoting and trying to secure the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals, which were the parent of the Sustainable Development Goals, really. And when the Millennium Development Goals were being negotiated, basically from the mid-1990s and then agreed in 2000, the world was one where extreme poverty was the defining characteristic of life for most people. When I was born, I'm 61 years old. When I was born, the majority of human beings lived a life characterized by hunger, watching their children die in infancy, incomes less than $1 a day, not going to school, really brutal, extreme suffering. And the point of the MDGs was to reduce that, the extent to which that was the life experience of people. And the remarkable thing was that between 1990 and 2015, the core goal, reducing by half that level of extreme poverty, was in fact achieved. Likewise, there were dramatic improvements in infant mortality, maternal mortality, access to education, and so on. So these goal frameworks can be valuable and powerful. One of the things the MDGs did was unlock a lot of additional financing. Global aid levels increased very dramatically the years after the MDGs were agreed, because people around the world and their governments could see there's a goal set here which are attractive and which is achievable. Now, the SDGs are different, obviously. There are more of them. It's more complex to understand them. Some people say that because everything is prioritized, nothing is really prioritized, so it leads to diffuse activity, and it's proven harder to mobilize resources and activity around them. But a goal framework, nevertheless, can be a valuable framing for global public policy. It's also the case, of course, that the era in which the MDGs were born and then made progress was a different era to the one we live in now. 1990 to 2015 arguably was a very benign environment economically, geopolitically, in other ways, to allow development to progress. Now we have a different set of challenges. We've come out of COVID. We've got an uptick in conflict around the world, which predate but have been made much worse by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the consequences of that on global food and fertilizer prices and so on. We've had, and of course, we've got the general geopolitical environment, which is more challenging and more complex and less conducive to development progress than was the case earlier. Notwithstanding that, I think it's important not to be too pessimistic about the prospects on the SDGs. They are, as Ricardo said, an ambition rather than a guarantee. But I think in some areas there remains a good chance of substantial further progress between now and 2030. In terms of the core poverty goal, for example, reducing the proportion of people in extreme poverty, the projections are we'll be at around 500 million people or so by 2030 in that position. That's about 5%, possibly slightly more of the global population. So not zero, but better than 10%, which is where we are at the moment. There's some projections, the ones I have most confidence in myself, which say we could get to 2% by 2050, and that would really be a significant achievement. The biggest, most important step for any human being in escaping poverty is that first step, to get from $1 a day to $2 a day. That's where you get the biggest improvement in the human life experience. And so that focus on very dramatic poverty, I think, is a powerful and valuable one in terms of overall improvement of the human condition. I think on some of the environmental targets, they look more challenging, is the truth of it. And we need to be honest about that and work out what to do about it. The prospects from now do depend on what action we take. And I think myself, there are going to be three big drivers of the rate of progress of the global community over the next 15 years. The first is technology, do we find a way to use technological improvement for the global benefit of mankind using artificial intelligence and so on? I remember getting an iPhone in 2007 when they first came out, and it was a transformation in what we could do in terms of communication, lots of benefits from it. But we've also learned that there are downsides from technology. So one big driver of how well we do in future will be whether technology is managed successfully for the good of humanity. Second will be whether we make more progress than we're making at the moment in dealing with the climate emergency. Everyone's very familiar with that. I won't talk more about that now. And then the third will be geopolitics, in particular, how this set of tensions between, on the one hand, the rising China, and on the other hand, a defensive, nervous, remaining sole superpower really in the US, how those tensions get evolved, hopefully in a way which is peaceful and promotes stability. What do we do if we're parliamentarians or we're policymakers? What, given all this background, are the smart things to do? So firstly, I would say it's really important to make the case for the SDGs. It might be hard to make the case. It's really important to keep doing that. And the event today helps us do that. Progress is possible. That's the biggest lesson from the MDG experience. It's also necessary because the world is integrated. What happens in one place inextricably has effects on everybody else. So we are all in this together. It is true that nobody is safe on the planet until all of us are safer or feel safer than we do at the moment. So the first thing we have to do is make the case. The second thing, though, is to be realistic and honest about the prospects and challenges, and to debate and expose problems and behaviors which are not conducive to progress on the MDGs. And then the third thing I would say, this is my last observation, Stephen, really, is fundamentally national action is the most important action. The nation state is the single most important unit of organization for human beings on the planet. And so what happens at the national level is the most important thing. And obviously parliaments have a fundamental role in what happens at the national level. And I think that Ricardo's list there of the positive role that parliaments can play and the practical things that can be done is a very useful starting point. So if we just take those points away, Stephen, I think this will prove to be an hour very well spent indeed. And I'm grateful for the chance to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. And that was very thought-provoking. You spoke about the drivers for this next period. You spoke about the smart things to do. And I think you reflected on the MDGs. And I know looking at the chat, that's something that is being picked up in terms of perhaps lessons we might learn from both the MDGs and the SDGs as we look beyond 2030, as well as looking at what we can do over this next 7 years. So I think Ricardo and Sir Mark have set out the broad picture, some of the challenges, but also both of them have spoken about the role of legislators and the role of Parliament. So I'm very pleased now that we're going to turn to two parliamentarians in turn, the first of whom is the Honourable Lenora Qereqeretabua, who is both Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of Fiji and Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs. And I know that she presented as part of Fiji's team at the high-level political forum last month, the voluntary national review for her country. So Lenora, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'd like to, first of all, introduce the gentleman sitting to my left. He is Esrom Manuel, the Assistant Minister for Finance for Fiji. So good evening from a cool 22 degrees in Suva, Fiji's capital. And I hope you have a great day wherever you are today. I'll just get straight into it because I'm very aware of the time. So with, first of all, I'll speak to Fiji's approach towards the SDGs. And the SDGs have been the underlying principles for Fiji's national development. In implementing the SDGs, Fiji has adopted a whole of government approach and utilized national development planning as the primary instrument to drive forward the SDG implementation. In 2017, the Fijian government launched its 5-year and 20-year national development plans, or NDPs, with the vision of transforming Fiji. And the NDP reflects the country's development priorities and goals for transforming itself into a modern and a progressive island country. Mainstreamed and integrated within the various thematic areas of the National Development Plan are the 17 SDGs, 15 SDGs explicitly integrated into the corresponding 29 strategic priorities of NDP, while SDG 10, reducing inequalities, responsible consumption and production, SDG 12, and climate action, SDG 13, are treated as cross-cutting issues across the National Development Plan. And consequently, the SDG implementation and its monitoring hinge on the National Development Plan process. Fiji, I think most countries will attest to this, was performing comparatively well on many of the goals of the 2030 agenda, though not all of the targets within these goals. And for instance, Fiji had done pretty well in providing free education, affordable internet and electricity access, and also essential water services to its citizens. Though we do admit that many of our infrastructure was aging and is now demanding immediate attention and a lot of investment. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which finally arrived in Fiji in March of 2020, had a very negative impact on our progress of the SDGs and really hampered our economic growth. And also, despite the improvements that were made, there were a number of areas that required much further effort for Fiji to demonstrate any progress. In particular, those associated with neonatal mortality, sanitation, violence against women and girls and children, the empowerment of women, the transition to sustainable energy and transport, clean cooking fuel, energy efficiency, and the maintenance of essential infrastructure. Onto our our voluntary national review, which I presented earlier this year. Since our first submission of our VNR in 2019, ongoing efforts have been dedicated to addressing and advancing the SDGs, and notable progress has been made on several fronts, particularly in SDG 4, 5, 6, 11, and 13. However, the global crisis experienced in recent years have really adversely affected our progress on the other SDGs, in particular 1, 2, 3, 8, and 10. And recognizing the need for this improvement, the government of Fiji has prioritized enhancing this VNR compared to the previous 2019 report. According to the VNR, or this year's VNR, Fiji has made significant progress in improving its data availability. And I think this has been one of the most important step-ups in terms of Fiji's ability to report more accurately on our SDGs. And that's just the availability of data. From 2019 to 2022, there's been a notable increase of 40 indicators for which sufficient data is now available. And these data requirements are vital for informed policymaking. Fiji has made progress on most of the SDGs, with 2 SDGs on track to reach their targets by 2030. And this is clean water and sanitation, though check this space in 6 months, please, and SDG 10 on reduced inequalities. However, there's been, unfortunately, negative progress on SDG 3 with good health and well-being, requiring greater efforts to reverse the trend in the years leading up to 2030. 3 SDGs, namely gender equality, SDG 5, life below water, SDG 14, and peace, justice, and strong institutions, SDG 16, had insufficient data, unfortunately, to accurately determine Fiji's progress. Nevertheless, based on the available data, progress was evident in SDGs 5 and 16, and there was regression observed in SDG 14. As we've already spoken about, Sir Mark and Ricardo spoke about the geopolitical conflicts that have been happening, and we in the Pacific being right in the middle of the west and the east of the Pacific can testify to this. But let me just tell you very quickly, I only have, I have less than 4 minutes about the intergovernmental frameworks and the actions being taken by Parliament right now. Over the recent years, the Fiji Parliament has expanded its role and initiated activities to strengthen its support towards the promotion, implementation, and the monitoring of the SDGs. Shortly after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, Fiji was among the first parliaments in the world to carry out a comprehensive self-assessment exercise to properly implement the goals. And the self-assessment exercise provided a good opportunity for the Parliament to review this engagement, identify gaps and challenges, even as far as standing committees and scrutinizing annual reports, for example, where our standing orders in the Fiji Parliament require us to look at policies and laws through gender-sensitive lens, but this has to be extended to the SDGs as well. The Fijian Parliament has taken the initiative to mainstream gender issues in its legislative processes and oversight functions, as I've said. We have a gender toolkit titled Scrutinizing Legislation from a Gender Perspective that was launched in 2017. We also have, made some very basic changes. For example, we used to have single-use plastic bottles in our Parliament, and this only just changed in this term of Parliament, where we now have been given reusable bottles, or we just use these carrots from the Parliament kitchen. And our vision for the SDGs beyond 2030, again, it's totally connected to our National Development Plan. Fiji has set its priority goals based on the national and local context, such as government debt to be reduced to 35% of GDP, reducing unemployment rate below 4%, clean, safe water and proper sanitation, eradicating poverty. I know we only have 7 years to go, and this is going to be, again, not a guarantee, but an ambition to reach for. Electricity for all, the provision of affordable housing. The Ministry of Housing is right now talking to stakeholders about a new building policy for Fiji. Universal access to quality education, high quality healthcare system, food and nutrition security, women in development. As most of you know, we had 11 women members of Parliament in 2020. Unfortunately, we have gone backward in that, and we now had 6 women voted into our Parliament in the last elections in December, and that number has dropped to 5 with the resignation of 1 female member of Parliament. We're committed to protecting culture, heritage, and our natural environment, and national security, and finally, digital connectivity. So in conclusion, we believe that we as a nation must stand united in our conviction that the participation and cooperation of all stakeholders are fundamental to achieving the SDGs, the global agenda. And I thank you for allowing Fiji to be part of this very, very important panel discussion. And I did that in 9 minutes and 42 seconds. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much indeed, Lenora. And that was brilliant. I think you managed to set out very, very comprehensively the approach that Fiji has taken, including some practical examples, but also highlighting the challenges ahead. And I'm very, very grateful to you for that. And I think some of the issues that you've raised, both in terms of the next 7 years, but also then the agenda beyond 2030, are ones that we will pick up in the question and answer session in a moment. So thank you very much indeed to you, Lenora, for that presentation today. Our 4th panelist is Irranca-Davies, MS, member of the Senedd, the Parliament of Wales, which he joined in 2016, having previously served as a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom House of Commons. And Hugh, amongst other things, is the chair of the Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee of the Senedd. Hugh, the floor is yours.
Diolch, Stephen. Thank you very much. Croeso o'r cymoedd hyfryd yng Nghymru. Welcome from the beautiful Welsh valleys here in South Wales. And it's a delight to be joining you. I'm going to speak very much in, if you like, colloquial terms. And the two things that I'm mainly going to address are what are we doing in Wales in terms of achieving the SDGs, but also how are we doing as well? What's the progress to date? And it's already been touched upon by all other contributors, the importance of parliamentarians within this process. Even though I'm a former minister at the UK government level from back in 2008, 9, 10 and so on, and a minister down here formerly as well, I'm a humble backbencher. So what I say is, as a backbencher, but as a parliamentarian who believes vehemently in the power of scrutiny and being critical friends of government in order to drive that ambition that we have around the SDGs. And picking up from what colleagues have said earlier on, and I'll come to some of the detail on this in a moment, I think I'll touch on what we're doing in Wales, but overall, I'm going to tell you what my end is. We are doing a lot within Wales already. We are seeing progress without a doubt, and I'll touch on some of those aspects. But there is much more to be done. And I think Welsh Government gets that as well as wider society. But it's a question now of how we scale the heights of the ambition that we've set out. So let me just talk about what we're doing before I turn to that detail of how we're doing. 2015 was the year that was. It was the significant year because, of course, it was the establishment of the Sustainable Development Goals and the framework that we have globally. But in Wales, that was translated into legislative action through, I think, what was one of the most far-sighted pieces of legislation globally that we've seen, which was the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act here in Wales. So in the same year, we translated into legislation the way we would take forward 7 goals, translating the 17 SDGs into action in Wales. And we deliver everything in Wales through the lens of that Wellbeing and Future Generation Act. So whether that's health, transport, education, the environment, biodiversity, anything you can think of, it is all done through the lens of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Now, part of that act is setting up monitoring and evaluation procedures and regular reports to the Senedd and to parliamentarians. It also enables the Auditor General of Wales to report on progress on sustainable development goals within Wales as well, which the Auditor General has indeed done. But it also enables committees in Wales, the Public Accounts Committee, the Climate Change, Environment and Infrastructure Committee, of which I'm a member, to evaluate progress as well, either in specific areas or overall. And how do we do this? Well, we do it set against the 50 national indicators that were established by Welsh ministers. But when I say established, they follow the principles of the SDGs. They collaborated and co-produced 50 national indicators that they could be measured against. And those indicators are also then supplemented by a set of national milestones. We haven't got all of them yet, but these milestones will tell us how we are doing at each phase, at each step, year by year along the way. We haven't got them all in place, but the first ones were published in December 2021, and they will allow committees, the Auditor General and others, then to hold Welsh Government to account on how they are progressing. So we have that framework in place. We have the overall framework of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Below that, we have a set of data and evaluation that are linked to the national indicators and the national milestones, so we can check progress to it. And we have the bodies in place to do it, including parliamentarians, but also the Auditor General. Let me just turn to a couple of those that may be of interest that other contributors have touched on as well. So we have measures around, measure number 2 is national indicator is healthy life expectancy at birth, including the gap between the least and the most deprived. And the milestone of that is increasing the healthy life expectancy of adults and narrowing the gap in healthy life expectancy between the least and the most deprived by at least 15% by 2050. Number 18 is reducing the poverty gap. Number 37, interestingly for people on the call, is to produce 1 million Welsh speakers in day-to-day Welsh speaking. The Welsh language, as I began today, is very important here in Wales, and it's part of our culture and our economy as well throughout Wales. Measure number 41 on greenhouse gas emissions, number 44 on biological diversity, number 48 on the percentage of journeys by walking, cycling and public transport. I chair, Stephen, the cross-party group here in the Senedd on active travel. It's great to see the progress that we have made, not only in terms of being the UK's leading now investment within active travel, but also the commitment of government in a number of significant policy ways in trying to change the behaviour. But how are we doing? Let me turn to that in the last few minutes, because that is something of a mixed picture. There undoubtedly has been progress, and that's been reported on by not only Senedd parliamentarians, but by a number of bodies, including the Public Accounts Committee. Public Accounts Committee noted in its report from 2021 that in the years immediately after the Act was passed, after 2015, Welsh Government was probably too slow to actually implement across the whole of the public bodies implementing the Sustainable Development Goals and the duties on those public bodies to make it happen. The committees that have looked at this, the Public Accounts Committee, suggests that we've got an overcomplicated landscape of public delivery within Wales. We do love within Wales collaboration and cooperation, and we set up a lot of bodies to do it, but we've probably overcomplicated it. And one of the things looking to the future is how we streamline that so that we can make it simpler to deliver on our SDGs and the public duties now that extend across 44 public bodies and agencies. So the landscape needs to be changed as well there. But we are making progress because you can see it in specific areas of legislation. We take a health in all approach to all our policies in Wales across all, whether it's housing, whether it's transport, anything, a health in all approach as fixed by the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. We're taking through legislation at the moment on air quality in soundscapes, which will be cutting edge within the UK. We are taking forward proposals on sustainable food systems, partly driven by private members' legislation, but also through reform of sustainable farming in Wales as well, which should have benefits for biodiversity as well. We took through only last year the Social Partnership and Procurement Bill, which brings together government and employers, workers' representatives to work together to promote environmental, economic imperatives, social and cultural imperatives for the well-being of Wales. And there's much more besides. So it's a snapshot of what is happening in Wales. We note that when external third parties have looked at what we're doing here in Wales, they have reflected that whilst, like many, there was a slow start initially, the acceleration and the ambition that is shown in Wales is not only laudable, but is encouraging. We face the same challenges that many others do in reaching those levels of ambition. But what we do have now is an independent Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, as well as Senedd parliamentarians such as myself, as well as the Auditor General, that can hold Welsh Government to account, hold Welsh public bodies to account as well on progress towards our national wellbeing indicators, those 50 indicators that underpin our SDG commitments here in Wales. And they note that we are speeding up, we are accelerating. So progress, yes, more to do, certainly, but we are definitely, I think, Welsh Government trying to do its best, and us as parliamentarians trying to hold them to account and push them to go further and faster. Thank you, Stephen.
Hugh, thank you very much indeed. I think that was a very upbeat and optimistic account from Wales, but also candid in recognising the remaining challenges. And the piece of legislation that Hugh spoke about, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, is shared by Tom Davis in the chat for anyone who wants to have a look at that. I think we've heard from Fiji and from Wales two really, really powerful examples of ways in which both parliaments and governments have responded to the SDGs in those examples. Our final speaker, and I'm delighted that she's able to join us, is Sania Haider from the Commonwealth Youth Council. We know the majority of the people of the Commonwealth are young, and whilst the SDGs are universal and apply to us all, they hold a particular importance for young people, and the CYC provides that voice within the Commonwealth. Sania is a youth leader from Pakistan, and I know from previous engagement with her what a powerful ambassador she is, both for Pakistan and indeed for young people across the Commonwealth. Sania, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Stefan. Delighted to be able to speak at this with all the honorable panelists here today. I'll just share my screen quickly. Okay, so I will start with the introduction of CYC because I'm representing the voice of CYC. It's the Commonwealth Youth Council, which is the official representative voice of more than 1.4 billion young people in the Commonwealth. More than 60% of the population within the Commonwealth, which has 56 countries at the moment, as young people. So SDGs and Commonwealth Youth Council is really interlinked. This year we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of CYC. It was first established back in 2013 with the support of the Commonwealth Secretariat's youth program, and it was endorsed by all the heads of government in Sri Lanka as an autonomous youth-led organization. So at CYC, what do we do? Our aim is to further advance the youth development agenda, which is again interlinked with the SDG agenda. We integrate the young people, their voices into the development work of the Commonwealth at the regional level, national level, pan-Commonwealth levels. We work to mobilize the voices of the young people and advocate for governments to engage with young people meaningfully. We provide a sustainable platform for engagement. For example, we have different national youth councils, we have national youth delegates, and we want them to be linked with decision makers and youth-led development initiatives. So for that, we would partner with the Commonwealth Secretariat and with other youth-led or even development partners such as UNDP, Rotary, etc. So to focus on youth development. So we are a team of 10 executive members who are elected by the national youth delegates representing the Commonwealth countries, and we have a chairperson from this time from the Pacific, Papua New Guinea, and vice chairperson for policy, advocacy, partnership resources, inclusion and engagement. And then we have 5 representatives from different regions of the Commonwealth: Asia, Africa, Caribbean, Europe and Canada, and Pacific. And my portfolio is the special interest groups representative that looks towards integrating the voice of the marginalized young people in the different processes of the Commonwealth Youth Council and young people. So that's how our team is. So one of the major initiatives that we had is the Commonwealth Youth Academy that we launched almost 2-3 months ago, and we already have more than 30 courses. So what the Commonwealth Youth Academy does is, our goal was to tackle the issues of access to learning for youth in the Commonwealth. So we came up with this idea that we want to have courses, master classes, webinars for young people, led by young people. And our mission is to educate, connect, and empower we want to reach to 100 million young people over the next 5 years. We want to build their different skills. We are mainly focusing on practical skills, public speaking, problem solving, communication, leadership are examples of that. Similarly, we're focusing on soft skills as well, team management, time management, organizational skills, and the most importantly in this age is the digital skills. So we are focusing on things like can we discover topics like blockchain technology, how AI is impacting the lives of young people. So would highly encourage all the young people listening to please join our Commonwealth Youth Academy, which has the Commonwealth Youth Academy.org as the link. So it would be great if you can all look at enroll into the courses, and we issue certificates as well. So from the standpoint of a young person, what are some of the positive of the SDGs? We know that since the launch of the SDGs, there has been this momentum, this awareness campaign that among young people about the critical global issues. So inspiring them to have some positive change at the national level or the local level even. So, and for that we have the different model United Nations conferences that are occurring, and they have specific SDG agenda incorporated in that. We have the UN Youth Office, in which there's this young leader for SDGs portfolio. So youth are really the main stakeholders for SDGs. Why? Because if we look at the definition of the sustainable development, it is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising those of the future. And future generation, currently us, the young people, would be the ones who would be bearing the brunt of our actions that we have been doing. So the 2030 agenda reflects the ambitions and visions of young people. We see that the climate crisis and young people's educations are intricately linked. So through both the direct effects, for example, through destruction of education infrastructure, degradation of learning environments. We saw last year was really devastating for Pakistan. In particular, 1/3 of the country was under water with severe wash issues, water and sanitation issues, hygienic issues, and the following food crisis, which really put Pakistan many years behind the goals that we wanted to pursue as part of the SDG agenda. So really the positives of the SDGs are that it puts youth at the heart of the global goals. Whereas some of the negatives of the SDGs are there's limited implementation, particularly, I would not say just the developing countries because of lack of resources, but also there's much to do from the developed countries' perspectives as well. We still see that we are continuously seeing disconnected policies. For example, major players like China, even though they are advocating or trying to transition to solar or wind energy in their own country, but through One Belt and Road initiatives, we are still seeing Pakistan as part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. And in the last few years, we had a lot of coal power stations popped up. I'm not being diplomatic at all. I'm being very, as a young person, it's my duty to be very clear. So that's very alarming as a young person, that's a very disconnected policy that we are having coal power stations instead of moving to clean energy, particularly when Pakistan is facing the brunt of the climate change and it's one of the most vulnerable countries. Another really important issue is the lack of youth involvement, even though we have all those offices, UN Youth Office for SDGs, or even this year we are at the Commonwealth, we are celebrating Year of Youth, but really at the heart, how much are young people involved in the parliamentarian decision-making when it comes to SDGs or even development local agendas? how much is their youth involvement. So it's both the young people are trying to get involved. I see there's a lot of, we had this climate strike that was led by young people, but we need a lot more encouragement or openness from the governments, from the policymakers to really have young people at the center, and insufficient resources, not just for developing countries, but really the young people who are trying to have different initiatives. I think we are facing a lot of challenges in implementing those SDG related projects. And one of the examples of disconnected policies that I was talking about was that in year 2022, due to the energy crisis, the government spend more than 900 billion euros on fossil fuel subsidies. So that's an example of disconnected policies. So to further integrate SDGs into policy legislation, what can parliamentarians and governments do? They can involve youth into the decision-making process. They need to incorporate SDGs into educational curricula. Right now, many few young people in both developed and developing countries would know what SDGs are. So that education is really important. Giving incentives and accountability. So offering incentives for businesses, private sectors, third sector that contribute to SDGs, and also having mechanisms to hold them accountable. And most importantly, funding allocation as well as climate justice. We want the developed countries who are the majority of the emitters of the CO2 pollutions, the plastic users, we want them to be able to give really funding to countries like Pakistan, Nigeria, who are really bearing the brunt of this climate crisis, despite contributing less than 1% to this climate crisis. And cross-sectoral collaboration, so encouraging collaborations across the different sectors, including government, academia, businesses, and really using media, social media, which is very popular among young people, to tackle those issues. So if we want to envision the SDGs beyond 2030, we want to really have a proper alignment. We want to use innovation and technology, which Mark also really stressed upon. AI, we don't know how AI is evolving, what are the repercussions, and the young people are more and more going to work with AI and the mental health challenges, issues that comes with it. The digital divide is still there, still glaring. We want to bridge that, and we want to really continue with our commitments to ensure that we have a sustainable and prosperous world for the current generation as well as the future generation. I'll stop there. Thank you so much for listening, and sorry for exceeding by a few minutes. Thank you.
Sania, thank you so much. That was very, very powerful and rightly, I think, challenging of all of us in terms of the perspective from young people across the world, including in the Commonwealth. Look, we've got 10 minutes, and I want to make the best of those 10 minutes with this amazing panel. So basically 2 minutes each. And if our panelists can be thinking about how they might address what I'm going to say now in 2 minutes. In the chat, there's been some conversation, and Sania just addressed it, about beyond 2030, and that is the theme that we gave for today's seminar. Anita in the chat has talked about looking at a different, more flexible approach with 3 sets of 5-year objectives and key results as a different approach, maybe learning from the experience of the MDGs. Amanda Ellis has spoken about a regenerative approach to goals beyond 2030. What I want to do, and I'll come to each of the panel members again now, is ask them to address that beyond 2030 if they can, but I also want to encourage the other panelists to address something that Sania has said, which is really about the voice of young people. And I think in particular, if I can address this to Lenora and Hugh, who I'll come to first, is for parliaments. You've both rightly spoken about the importance of the role of parliaments, but also parliaments and their engagement with civil society, the public, citizens, but especially young people. Can I ask Lenora first and then Hugh, what can we do as we take this forward to and beyond 2030 to engage more with young people on the Sustainable Development Goals? Lenora.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to your question. First of all, just in terms of context, I just wanted to let people know that beyond 2030, our region, the Pacific, has a 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, which is our vision as Pacific Islanders. It's our blueprint for a safe and prosperous Blue Pacific in our future. And in putting together Fiji's VNR for 2023, we consulted widely, especially with civil society organizations and NGOs. Now, I have to admit, I don't know how widely we consulted with youth organizations and youth CSOs, but I know that right now in Fiji, government is engaging more and more with civil society organizations. And I'm very confident that we are going to be hearing the voice of youth more often in terms of what we see as our major challenges going past 2030. We are identifying right now climate mobility adaptation strategies as we go past 2030. We have, facing rising sea levels, recurring and intense natural disasters, climate hazards. So we are working proactively with our civil society organizations to bring that to the fore of the way our parliament is thinking. And again, I go back to what the point I made in my first statement, which was to really use the SDG lens, not just gender equality lens, but SDG lens when we're scrutinizing annual reports and talking about policies. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Lenora. Hugh.
It's such a huge question. I'll touch on some of the aspects of it through a young person's lens. There are things that we have the framework in place, I've mentioned already within Wales, but there is a significant role in reaching out and engaging and co-producing solutions, as well as identifying the problems and the challenges with young people. So some of the ways we do that are, we've actually established within Wales, as they've done in Scotland as well and other parts of the UK, a Children's and Younger Persons Commissioner. And they're specifically tasked with reaching out within that lens as well, by the way, of the Wellbeing Future Generation framework, of reaching out to young people in all aspects of policy, including environment and climate change, health and well-being, and so on. So we'll need to continue to drive forward on that. We have a youth parliament established, and it's not just a youth parliament in name. The youth parliament in Wales comes from diverse sectors of society, of young people within Wales, and it sits in the Senate as well as doing its own work and its own programme. It decides its own programme of focus. It often tends to be from year to year focused around issues such as mental health and well-being, the environment and climate change and biodiversity. Those two they're currently looking at, but they actually come and sit within the Welsh Senate with us, if you like, older parliamentarians sitting around, not only to hear what they're saying, but to learn from this and then to see how we can implement the proposals they have for tangible policy. But it's also how we do that at a much more local level. So we have youth councils and youth fora within every local authority, municipal authority now within Wales as well. And my final thought on this, Stephen, as well, it's also to do with the work of the committees of parliamentarians. So the committee I chair, the Climate Change Committee that I sit on, it's how we go out beyond the bounds of our parliaments and work with and listen to younger people and bring their ideas back into our policy. So the framework is there, but I think sometimes the most radical, challenging, innovative ideas are coming from those generations of young people who are going to have to face this going forward. And that's why we have to do this.
Thank you very much, both of you. Sania, what do you make of those responses?
I think they are excellent coming from parliamentarians, honorable parliamentarians. I think, yes, one thing that I also really appreciate is that if we have a parliament, having a youth parliament as a shadow, and not just they are not just learning or building their capacity, but also having that space to really discover initiatives or solving problems that are really matter to young people, because they would be the one who would be really dealing with those issues later as well. So I think that's really the key here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come finally to Ricardo and then to Mark, and really bring us back to the theme of today, which has been addressed so brilliantly by all 5 of our panelists. And Mark spoke at the beginning about the need to make the case. And I think the concrete examples we've heard from both Fiji and Wales are part of the way that that can be done. But I'm interested in both of your thoughts on that making the case over this crucial next 7 years. And then secondly, anything you might feel able to say about beyond 2030 and what we might do to learn from both the MDGs and SDGs as we take this agenda forward. Ricardo first, and then finally to...
Thank you, Stefan. I am extremely glad to see Honorable Lenora sitting with the finance official, finance minister official there, which I think is a bit how we perceive going forward for the partnerships with that Parliament needs to navigate this the complexity of transforming national economies into SDG commitments and targets. So as we move forward, in my opinion, what cannot happen is having the world and the nations within the world, countries, states, governments, moving away from the commitments of the Agenda 2030 and start having resistance and prioritizing other approaches to development and economic growth that are no longer aligned with sustainable development goals or the spirit of the 2030 Agenda. And parliaments play a central role in creating the consensus that are needed to have the nations, the countries, the governments, the states moving in the direction of sustainable development. But to do that, parliaments will have to understand their limits, the way they operate, and how politics plays a substantial role in their outcomes. And by partnering with external governance actors, other actors in the checks and balances of governance, and bringing to Parliament the knowledge, including youth, and bringing to Parliament the knowledge, the know-how, and instruments that are needed to support MPs, representatives of the people, to navigate this complexity. This is extremely important. And one thing will be sure, fiscal space for financing development will be tightened and tightened. It will reduce. So the capacities to understand where the funds are coming from and how they are spent will be crucial for parliaments. And as we hear Eleonora and Honorable Eleonora and I'm sorry, I cannot spell your name. I will spell the last name, Irranca-Davies, because the first name I really cannot. It's too complicated for my phonetics. As we hear how they explain the way the planning, budgeting are designed and aligned with the SDG targets and how is it working in their countries, a parliamentarian to be able to exert oversight over these targets would need all the tools that are there, including AI, open data, very good understanding of how PFM is working. Finally, I just would want to say that parliaments will have to also incorporate innovation hubs that attract young people. The space for innovation inside parliaments will have to be aligned with what we have been seeing lately, with labs, with spaces where young people can reflect their ideas. The traditional way of going and hearing the young people might need some new spaces where innovation can happen, and this is a very good way to attract young people and to have their ideas represented in a way they recognize. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ricardo. Final word to Mark.
As I said at the beginning, I think these goal frameworks can be very valuable and powerful. I mean, I think the MDGs was a powerful framework because it led to a lot of change and made the world better for its poorest people in lots of important ways. And that was the idea with the SDGs. The jury's out a little bit still, I think, on the SDGs, and probably now isn't the time to make a judgment on them. But if I were forced today to offer advice on what the successor framework should be, the thing that would be in my mind would be that the next period will include the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the UN, either in 2045 if the anniversary is chosen to be the date when the treaty was negotiated, or in 2046 when the UN first met. And what I would be keen to see would be to use the next period really to reinforce and recommit and to get everybody bought into the fundamental premises set out in the UN Charter that were established in 1945 and 1946, especially those universal commitments and values around fundamental human freedoms. I think re-establishing that as a fundamental element of our global collaboration is likely to be an important thing to do to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the creation of the UN.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. What a great note on which to draw this webinar to a close. On behalf of all of the participants, can I thank our marvellous panel for sparing the time and, more importantly, their thoughts today, which I think have contributed to a very high level of discussion. And for everyone on the call, as you leave Zoom, you will be asked to complete a post-webinar survey. It's very short. It really helps us as we plan for these events in future. Have a good day. Thank you very much. And I look forward to continue to work with you all in the future. Thank you.